Hey, hi. Welcome to Someone Else's Movie, the original podcast where an actor, writer, director, or nebulous industry figure gives a little love to a movie they didn't make. I'm Norm Wilner, senior film writer for Now Magazine, and this is the other thing I do. My guest this week is Michelle Nolden, an actor you might know from Saving Hope, Nikita, Republic of Doyle, October Faction, and currently CBC's Heartland. She's also the artistic director of the Lakeshorts International Short Film Festival, which is celebrating its 10th anniversary a year late this fall, thanks to COVID, with a special Grand River Shorts edition November 12th at the Dominion Telegraph Centre in Paris, Ontario. There's some good stuff playing there, and you should check it out if you're in the area. Michelle chose Secrets and Lies, Mike Leigh's 1996 Palme d'Or winner about the relationship between two very different London women. Cynthia, an anxious factory worker played by Brenda Blethyn, and Hortense, an optometrist who discovers after the death of her adoptive parents that Cynthia is her birth mother. Hortense contacts Cynthia and asks her to meet, and the build-up to that meeting, and its repercussions, will echo through both of their lives. Leigh's film is much more complex than that, of course. And it always is. This is Someone Else's Movie.
I think that I often come back to this film in so many things, as an actor, and then as a new, somebody who's newly writing and directing and all of that stuff. I always reference it, and the movie has always stuck with me. And so I was like, Secrets and Lies. And then I watched it again too. And I was like, oh my God, it's such a good film. And when I first watched it, I mean, it's 20 some odd years old.
25 right? This 25 year, years old. 1996. Oh yeah.
So when I first watched it, I mean, I was a young actor. I didn't have kids. So it was more the acting and the rawness and the freedom of the characters and all of that stuff that really got me, and where I wanted to be as an actor and how I wanted to work as an actor. But then when I watched it this time, I mean, I've recently lost both of my parents, and I'm a mom of 3 boys. And to watch it again now with that life experience that, of course, Mike Leigh would have had at the time, I was kind of blown away by it again, but in a different way.
It's always fascinating to me the way that we change, but the movies don't.
Right.
Like, it's telling the same story it always told, but you're just responding to different pieces of it. I was exactly the same way. I always feel conflicted about the circumstances of Secrets and Lies, because I do think it's Mike Leigh's best film. And it is also the film that I interviewed him for. And it was one of the worst interviews of my career.
Okay. So how so? I'm curious about that.
I know. I rarely tell it because I don't know. It went so badly. He was hostile, like actively hostile, to the point where, well, I should point out this was for television. So I was shooting him for Global TV. A producer had just asked me to jump in because I'd seen it and really loved it. And I knew his work and would I mind taking this on? I was like, I will talk to Mike Leigh. Absolutely. Sure. Let me do this. Right. And it turns out he's not a fan of television interviews. At least that's how it was explained to me after the fact. So, why even book the press day, but he did them, and he was just blunt and hostile and uninterested in engaging. And to the point where towards the end, he was picking his nose to render the footage unusable, which just felt contemptuous of the process, I suppose. I was 28, and I came out of it convinced that it was me, that I had done something wrong. And I brought the footage back, and I gave it to Bonnie, and she watched it and just said, wow, you didn't do anything. You're trying to save it. And I've never seen it. I can't bear to watch the thing. Right. And maybe they salvaged it 30-second soundbite. I have no idea to this day. Apparently, Ingrid Rendojo, who interviewed him for Now that same day, said he was great. And, that was back when you can get 30 minutes for print and 15 for television. And I've never met him or spoken to him since. I'd still like to, just to find out. But it was excruciating.
Because based on the film, I would have thought that he would have been extremely generous and open to process and to all of the things that go along with film, which is all of this other stuff too, right? Talking to people about the film, about process, getting that stuff out there, connecting with, aspiring filmmakers and young actors and journalists. And like, that's that's very surprising.
Yeah. I mean, maybe he was just having a bad day, or maybe the previous interview had gone badly. I don't know. I don't do a lot of TV anymore. And at the time, I think you were still able to get a decent conversational rhythm going. At least that was my experience when I was doing it with other people. And it was just like a brick wall. And yeah, the nose picking was something that's just like, it felt personal and weird. And
yeah, I won't pick my nose, I promise.
Well, this isn't going out on video. You're fine. Do whatever. But that was like one of the lowest days of my professional life. And I loved the movie, but I never went back to it. Well, that's not true. I have subsequently gone back to it, but it took me at least another, I don't know, 15 or 16 years to revisit it.
Well, I know what you mean, how it affects people. You know, I've had circumstances where, well, this actor shall remain nameless, but where, you know, I saw an actor treat people really, really poorly at TIFF, actually, one of the volunteers.
Ooh.
And I just was never able to watch him in a movie again because I just went, God, like... that poor person is volunteering and did not sign up for that shit.
Yeah. It's like going on a date and watching somebody be shitty to a waiter. It's just like, that is your character that you're seeing in that moment. That's the real person. It's like, well, that's not good.
Yeah. And I know, you know, we all have bad days and stuff like that, but yeah, no, I do know what you mean.
Yeah. So I have managed to get past it now with years of the therapy of watching his other films where he's clearly not the person that I talked to.
Right.
And I can't imagine that if that was who he was, people would be willing to work with him for, 6 months at a time to develop characters and do the improvisational work that creates his scripts. That he seems very collaborative as an artist. It was just one rotten day. And the movie is exquisite.
And we all have them.
Yeah. Yeah. I would assume. And the movie is exquisite. So it doesn't matter like what my personal experience was with him. This film is tremendous, and we should get back to the focus of that, which is just, it's easy to talk about it, even though I have this one personal check mark against it in my soul stomped on. But the film is wonderful. And yeah, so what's it like to see as a young actor when you're figuring things out? And were you familiar with his work at the time?
I mean, I sort of came into acting late. So for me at that time, like kind of, late 90s, early 2000s, I was just like a sponge. Like I was just taking whatever I could and seeing as many movies as I could. But I think that, Marianne, Jean-Baptiste and Brenda, Blethyn, like they just blew me away. Right. I was like that. That was like, if I could have dream characters, that would be it. But I've always been drawn, I think, to relationships, right? Like character driven kind of stuff, family relationships. Like if I thought about the other movies that I loved, like weird ones, like Steel Magnolias or The Lion King, or like the movies that they all go back to family relationships, right? Or even like The Celebration. Remember Vinterberg's Celebration? Twisted or Knives Out or whatever. Like all of those films, I really dig those films, but they're all kind of come back to family. And I have a great family, probably about as functional a family as you can get. So it's really odd that those are the movies that I'm drawn to. But I am, for whatever reason. And even in terms of like what I choose to write and create and stuff like that, I find that I think because those are the most important relationships to me in my life. And also I feel like when I first inhabit a character, to me, who they are as like in relationship to their family and their family relationships really helps me kind of define who that character is. Right.
Yeah. And these are worst case scenarios for families, right? Where there are, horrible truths coming to light and people turning on each other. Knives Out is a perfect example of that. Like, and I love the fact that script is built entirely on personal betrayals and people who feel betrayed, even if they aren't. And you just see them all revert to their worst selves. Secrets and Lies is about a family that doesn't know they're a family, which I think is just his work of genius, like the masterstroke of his thing, where every one of Mike Leigh's movies, almost everyone, maybe not Peterloo, are about people who've known each other too long, right? Like they know each other too well. They know each other inside and out, and they're kind of on some level tired of it, but they're all stuck together in whatever relationship they've forged for themselves.
Which I thought was so brilliant how he did that. Like, you remember when the brother is taking the pictures, right?
Mm-hmm.
And every little snippet of those are people exactly like that, where you could take that story and you could make that little 1 minute blip that you saw of that person. And each one of those things were so truthful that it set the tone that this is all of us. Like, that this story that we're about to see is each one of us. And exactly how you say, right? That they've known each other too long, and just the day-to-day, well, the kitchen sink drama that Mike Leigh's sort of famous for, right? Just the living and the drudgery of having to work through this shit because it's your family and you have to. And, you know, and I think that's what makes it so interesting.
Yeah. And it's, in this case, of course, it's a family that has to completely reconsider what the concept of family is, because there's another one. They're in the process of adding someone to their sphere, but they don't know who she is. And so you get this, I'm jumping around in terms of plot, but yeah, Cynthia is shown over and over again to have absolutely no self-control, no filter. Like, she'll say whatever's in her head. And over the course of the movie, we watch her reveal too much to Hortense, talk too much about herself, talk too much about her emotions, and all those little moments then build to that birthday party where
just blurts it out.
But you know it's coming, right? Like, you can see it on Blethyn's face, and it is just this sustained tension that comes from watching her and her eyes darting around, and she's thinking constantly. I've seen performances like that. I have never seen one where the actor is allowed to go so far into almost like unlikability in her tics and her squealing and the way she says sweetheart, and just it's like nails on a chalkboard. And Leigh forces us to understand her. By the time it finally bursts, that we know she can't help it, but we also know it's the thing she most needs to do. And it becomes this shattering moment of sympathy that, again, I don't think I'd ever seen anyone experiment with that on film before. And when you mentioned the celebration, it's
so, like, for me watching it was so groundbreaking, is because the time that he allows the actors to have, like that scene when they first meet and they sit beside each other. I remember thinking, why are they sitting beside each other? Nobody sits beside each other. They don't know each other. And then it's like a oneer, right? This whole long, what is it, 4 minutes or something?
It's like eight or nine.
Like, it just goes, it's forever, but it's like its own little small theater piece, that particular scene. But just the way that it crests and falls, and the way that the actors are just given the freedom to do that I just think is so amazing. And I actually in the very first short film that I ever wrote and directed, I had a similar kind of, where they were sitting beside each other for that very reason, just to see. And I had two fantastic actors, which was amazing. And just to trust that the actors, if you just give them the magical what if and the space and all that stuff, that they're going to fill it in, which I think is what Mike Leigh does. And certainly what he did in that scene, just to allow them to find it. And I wonder how many takes they did. Like, did they do 5 or did they do that one and they went, okay, we got it, moving on? Like, I would have to, I would love to do that.
I mean, as a director, if you get it in the first one and it's a oneer, do you do a second one as a safety? What would your instinct be, just to make sure?
I don't know if I would. I don't know. I mean, as an actor, I'm always willing to go again, but sometimes you go, well, why are we? Like, if we got it, whatever that truth is, like, you don't want to go back. If I was unsure that maybe I missed it, then I would go again. But if I thought that we had it, like if I had that scene and I watched it, I would go, okay, we need to do that again.
Yeah. Well, I mean, especially with how much is played, it's not just the technical stuff that has to take a lot out of the people playing it.
Yeah. I mean, to go through that, and you would just be prepared that it would be a totally different scene the next time that they did it, right? Because it really felt to me, I mean, that's when you're playing opposite a really good actor and every take is completely different, and you're really listening to each other. They were listening in every moment, right? So I wouldn't be surprised if they had like 3 completely different takes. I would probably say that. I would be like, I have everything that I need, but if you guys want to do another one to play, then like, let's go for it, because this is great.
Yeah, it's the centerpiece of the film, and it's not even the most important scene, really, because
Right.
of what the tensions are, because of what's coming. But if that was the high point, yeah, you're right. It's self-contained. It could have ended the film right there, almost. Like the explosion of emotion that comes out of Blethyn as Cynthia remembers. And I remember reading a review at the time, which struck me as really bizarre. It was the critics' insistence, or the critics' conviction, that Hortense had been conceived in a rape, that Cynthia's remembering something horrible. And that's why she bursts into tears. And I
feel like it's vague enough that it could be either, right?
Yeah.
I mean, that was what I had thought.
Oh, really?
Yeah, that was what but I don't know if that's because I knew that ahead of time, or whether I can't remember what I knew about this movie before I saw it. That's also the thing, right? Is how much you know about a movie before you actually see it.
Yeah. Maybe I read it differently. It just seems to me that because Hortense is Black, Cynthia's in denial about even the possibility that she could be her mother. And then she remembers whatever the encounter was, which I don't know. Maybe
in that part I wasn't sure, but it was later because she hadn't told her other daughter about her father. And so at the very end, when she tells her daughter about her father, but then she can't tell Hortense about hers, where she just said, that's what made me think that it wasn't good, whatever had gone down.
Yeah.
But I think it's interesting, the whole idea of race, and watching it again now versus 20 years ago, and I know that Mike Leigh was under a lot of criticism at the time for kind of ignoring or glossing over the whole idea of race. And I think that was one of the things that I actually loved about the film, was that it didn't play into it. And it was just about relationships between people. So it was there, but that wasn't the most important thing. But then I've also, as I'm sort of crawling out from under my own rock of white privilege lately, as we all are in the last while, sort of going, well, maybe I liked that because that made me feel comfortable, right? And because that made me feel okay about not having to think about it. And so it's interesting that that was 20 years ago, and now we are where we are and watching it now with this, sort of 2020 lens.
Yeah. I think Leigh could fool himself into thinking it was just about class, because that's his focus and always has been. I mean, he's not racially ignorant, I don't think, but I don't think that's his focus. He's like, his affinities are always with the working class characters, and people with money are not to be trusted. And I mean, that's the split between Morris and Cynthia, is that he's successful and she just isn't. And so she can't imagine him as having difficulties in his life, which sets up, again, Spall's knockout punch at the party. The revelation.
And then also Hortense being coming from a well-off family and doing really well and going to university and doing all that, and how she's like simultaneously proud of her and also knows that the short end of the stick she got because of her. Yeah, that's true. Hortense is presented very quickly as sort of the adoption success story, where she got the best possible footing to start. Yeah. And that was something Cynthia couldn't have provided, which is why she gave up a baby she never saw, and why she's sort of been in denial about it ever since. I think that's the thing that's the element of the story that I think allowed it to be successful in the States in a way that most of Leigh's films weren't. It's marketable because it is basically just a family story, and there are stories of adoption, and there was a whole wave of American movies about people finding their birth parents right around the same time, although most of them were on television. They were looked down on because they were TV movies. And here's a version of that is inarguably classier, I guess, than most of the productions that would have been made about it. This isn't a Lifetime movie. Like, this is the best possible version of a story like this, because it allows for the complexity that most television programs at the time weren't even addressing. You maybe see it on something flawed, right? Which is like one of the great things about all of Mike Leigh's characters. Every person that you see in that film is flawed. And I guess that was, as an actor, that was the thing always, because it was always like, well, what is my character's secret, right? What is their fear? What do they think is going to happen to them after they die? What do they like? Because that defines how that character lives their life, or how you step into it, right? And I felt like, especially as a Canadian actor, where sometimes you play leads, but sometimes you're just going in for a day player or whatever, right? That if I'm playing 3 lawyers in a row, but I change those things up, they're totally different characters, right? They're totally, totally different things. And I felt like every character that he had in that film had a secret.
Yeah. And, well, I mean, given the title, they're almost required to bring it in, right? But you also get the sense that when they leave, their movie could continue and it would be just as important.
Yeah. Which is, I think, why they're like those, and not bringing it into, well, that's like shorts, right? That's what I love about short film, is that you can see a little 2-minute thing, or even like a 30-second short film, and it can tell you a whole story. Like all of those little bits that we saw of the people being photographed, or the guy that came in who owned the shop before. He's like his whole movie in there. I was like, why is that guy even in there? Right. But he just comes in to bring his own. So they're like all these little short films that kind of come into this larger feature.
It's the sense of a bustling life. Have you seen Another Year?
No.
I think that's 2010 or 2011. It's another Leigh film. And it's about a couple who entertain their friends. That's all it is. Jim Broadbent plays the...
Oh, yeah. I know what you're talking about. Yeah, I know the film. I haven't seen it, but I know the film. Yeah.
And their friends are constantly coming from some misery. One of them is just a raging alcoholic. He's introduced drinking tall cans of lager on the train up to see them. He arrives and he's already drunk. Another one is just this perpetual singleton. She's always having miserable relationships and things aren't going well. And there is the quiet sense that any one of these characters could have a feature film about them exclusively, but also that Broadbent and Manville are enjoying their friends' loneliness and despair just a tiny bit. And that is so fascinating. Broadbent's got this little half smile on all the time, and he's sort of professorial and always asking people, well, what do you think is wrong with this? And what, how do you feel about this? And I couldn't tell for the first hour whether he was trying to help them and just adopting a sort of cheerful manner, or if he's poking them just a little bit more every time for his own pleasure. And by the end of the film, it doesn't matter. It's equally valid. Yeah. But that is just, how do you even get to that point as an actor or a filmmaker where you realize, no, that's what he's doing. He's like, whatever his motivation is, it's going to be opaque to the audience, but we know, and we won't tell you. And you're in the same position as everyone he's talking to, because you're constantly trying to suss out the tensions. Secrets and Lies does the same thing 15 years earlier, but with release, with this, just everyone gets it all out by the end. And we're left in, I think, ultimately a hopeful place.
Well, that's what I found about it that I thought was really, really interesting. And I think what made the movie stick with me too was that it ended, and I love my share of dark, twisted films for sure. But I love that this film was hopeful, and that it ended with kind of the world the way that I would want it to be, which, again, going back to the race issues in it, I saw it the way that I want the world to be, as opposed to maybe the way that it actually is, right? Which is why I liked that it was sort of glossed over. And same with, to think that, family and good relationships and love trumps all, which is kind of what the movie was at the end. That's what we were left with, was that they were gonna be sisters now, and they're gonna go out and they were gonna be a family, and however realistic that is. But you realize that it is possible because the characters are so real as you go through, and you fall in love with them, and you realize that they're flawed. And well, if they can trump it, then anybody can. Yeah. You have to live with them long enough to understand their motivations and understand what drives them. And then to realize at the end that they want each other. They want to be together. Hortense is only doing this because she needs to find out where she came from. And
then decides she wants to belong. And Cynthia has
That's
this
a grieving process, right? Which was something that I didn't understand before, but now being in a position of losing my parents, all of a sudden knowing how important that would be, right? That if this had come to her when her mom was still alive, would she have gone down that road, right? And so there's like these major life moments, not being able to have a baby for the brother and his wife, and like these just major kind of milestones that I think Leigh has captured in this I think that's also part of why it's timeless.
Yeah, it's timeless and it's generational, right? So it has moments where it becomes more relevant to some than others as the clock turns. My parents are still alive, so I have no idea how it'll play for me the next time. Don't have kids, but we did just adopt a dog, so
nice.
Yeah, the essential elements never change. And this is what we were talking about before. Like the film doesn't change. It's just us. We keep coming back to it from different perspectives.
That's a great thing you say about generational films, because I think that's actually, if I think about all of the films that I like, that's actually the key, is that I can watch them at different points of my life, whether it's The Lion King, whether it's any of those movies that I mentioned. They're generational. So so the stories are so truthful at each stage of life that when you watch them over and over, you go, oh yeah, I see it totally differently than I did when I was,
Yeah. Well, I mean, even something like The Lion King, if you're a parent, you're going to come at that early scene differently than you are if you see it as a kid.
For sure, right? All of a sudden, when he holds the baby, it's like a totally different thing. If you just,
Yeah. Well, I'm thinking of, like Mufasa's speech about when we die, we become the grass. And kids don't get it. They really don't. I've seen that movie with audiences, and the kids are just into the imagery. But then when Mufasa dies and reappears, spoilers to The Lion King, apologies to listeners, that scene at the very end just lands so beautifully because it's been set up and also mystical, and all the foolishness just goes away, and you're watching a cartoon that somehow, you're watching a cartoon animal adaptation of Hamlet, and somehow it connects.
And it's Hamlet, which is the same thing, right? Where Hamlet does all that growing in that sort of, short period of time, but that's really what it is these generational things, right? That's what keeps us.
Yeah. And here you have a movie about people in London who are not happy, being slightly less unhappy because they have each other, and then really unhappy because they have each other, and then finding a kind of grace on the other end of it. And
look at the personal responsibility for our happiness. Like what are we willing to do to be happy, and how much are we a victim of the things that have happened to us, and how much are we responsible for turning it around or making it better or whatever. And that really struck me in the film as well.
Yeah. And it doesn't have the scene that every other movie with a similar plot line has. There's not a lot of blame. People are willing to accept that they've made these choices, right? Like the starting point, and maybe that's the difference between the English version and the American version. Hortense never says, "You gave me away." She never attacks her for it. They discuss it, but there's no blame. There's no sense that she could have been an entirely different person. It's the scene you expected, the scene I expected to see as a viewer, and it never happened. And maybe I remember asking Leigh about this, and maybe that's what pissed him off. But the fact that it avoids all the speed bumps of the genre that it's in, because it is a really specific story that we have seen 100 times over. And the fact that he found a way in that no one else has tried, and an execution of it that is probably the best version that it ever could have been.
Right.
That's incredible to me. Watching it again, it does feel more miraculous than most of his films. I mean, I know how they're all constructed, and I know he works to shape them, but this one feels like he didn't even try. This one just feels like life is happening right in front of us.
And I wonder how much of that, like, that moment at the end when Brenda Blethyn she's just bawling after she's let everybody know, and then Hortense is sitting there and she comes up and she hugs her. Mm-hmm. Where I would expect her to get up and leave and say, this is more than I wanted. But I wonder how much of that is Marianne Jean-Baptiste, and how much is Hortense.
Yeah.
And in her improvisation and all of that stuff, that grace that she brought to the character, how much of that is the actor, and like what her instinct and her impulse was in that moment. I feel like, or I want to think, that Mike Leigh would say, what would you do in this moment? And she would say, I would leave, I would go to her. But that's the truth of Marianne coming in and walking over to her in that moment. And so I think that's also part of what I loved so much as an actor, is being able to be part of that collaboration and that crafting of the story. I would have loved to have been a fly on the wall watching that movie.
Yeah, it's a shame that he doesn't document the rehearsals, or I'm sure he does. It's a shame he doesn't release them and share them with people. Because it's exactly what you're saying. I think the genius of that performance of Jean-Baptiste's choice in that scene is that you can see she wants to leave and she's forcing herself to stay just for a little bit, right? But
and to be graceful and gracious, and which is a sign of her class, because class is not just about money, right?
Exactly.
Class is about accepting people for where they are at. And that, I think, when Mike Leigh explores class, that's the biggest part of it that he's exploring.
What are your obligations to other people?
Yeah. How do you make other people feel good? If you can entertain the queen, but you can also entertain some guy who's just come off the street who has no shoes. That to me is real class, right? Not how much money you have. Yeah.
Yeah. Standing is so crucial to, I was going to say, the English identity. It's obviously just as important in America and in Canada too, because the sense that there are different rules for people wherever you are on the economic strata, that's something that British cinema has always been kind of willing to deal with in a sideways fashion. No one ever discusses how much money they have. That's not done. And peerage and all of those things, they're simply taken as read. But Mike Leigh's films are swimming in it. They're all about who has the upper hand over whom. Like Peterloo is all about where everyone on the story of this horrible massacre that happened in Manchester in the 19th century, everyone is motivated based on how much money they stand to make or lose from the economic crisis that the film is about. Secrets and Lies just finds a modern version where no one ever talks about it, but it's the way they carry themselves. It's the way it's the tenor of their voice. It's how loud they're willing to be. I don't think Hortense ever raises her voice. She speaks sternly, but she never shouts because she doesn't have to. She's brought up that way.
And she thinks before she speaks, and she's methodical in the way that she does things. And she's learned the skill set, right? That's half of that.
Mm-hmm. At least.
Yeah.
And Cynthia just has she cannot take a breath before exploding or whining or crying. And it's a great character, right? I mean, on paper, that's a tremendous role to play because you have to put your entire self into it. And Brenda Blethyn, I've in all the other work I've seen, has never even approached it. It's not like other actors who just sort of have that little space that they occupy, and that's why you cast them, the character actor. Somebody like Jackie Weaver, who really only does the same thing every time, but finds different ways to modulate it. But you cast her for that part. Brenda Blethyn is a chameleon, and she's unrecognizable as herself in this, just because I don't think I've ever seen her be so needy on camera. And by the end of it,
great way to put it. That's exactly what she is. She's so needy. And then you juxtapose her with Hortense, who's so actually full and knows that she's a good person, and knows that she's just got the confidence that she's got that real true self confidence and authenticity. You put her against Cynthia, and then Cynthia's daughter too. And you're just like, that's what makes it so, I love the movie, and I bawled again when I watched it. Uh-huh. I did. And that's always a sign for me when I'm not looking at other things, right? Like that, when I watched that scene with the two of them when they met, and I wasn't looking at the time. And then I was like, I bawled, I was crying. And then I was like, oh God, when a movie moves you again that way, and you know what's happening, and I'm not looking at the cinematography, and I'm not looking at what the shot is, and I'm not looking at all of that other stuff, then you know that you've got something really, really classic.
Yeah, it's wonderful. It just I'm mad at myself that I was petty enough that I didn't rewatch it for all the time that I could have been rewatching it, but I'm kind of glad at the same time because it just got to whack me in the face all over again.
But you know what? I think that there's the reason why is because it's such a truthful film, right? And for the person who's at the helm of that to bring out those performances, there has to be a generosity, right? That's what you're expecting because I'm making all these leaps about what that set must have been like and how that improv must have been and that collaboration, because I just think the only way to get such beautiful, truthful performances would have to come that way. But I don't really know that for sure because I wasn't the fly on the wall. So I'm expecting that. And then I think that if that's not what the experience is when you meet that person, then you can see why you would be more disappointed. Yeah. Say if you had, met somebody that you had no great expectation of generosity from.
Yeah, that's fair. Actually, it's probably my fault.
No, I'm not saying that. I'm not saying that at all. I'm just saying that I think it's very, very natural that it felt more like a slap in the face than if it was somebody that you'd be like, well, I know that person is this. I would have felt the exact same way that you did.
Yeah, no, I don't really blame myself. I mean, I probably do on some other level. There is a Mike Leigh movie in this interaction, I would say. Like there's a short film about two people being stuck talking to each other for 20 minutes that becomes excruciating. Maybe I'll make it. That'll show him.
There you go.
I won't show anybody. It's but yeah, that's it. I'm inclined to be generous to him because I know how shitty a press day is and how awful it can be for people.
But it's never okay to not be kind.
That's fair. But I'm trying to find a segue that works for Lakeshorts.
My husband and I run a short film festival called Lakeshorts, which we're celebrating our 10-year anniversary this year. And we have the inaugural screening in Paris. And I think one of the things that I love about shorts is how in a short period of time, you can tell a complete story. And I think that that's something that Mike Leigh does very well with all of those characters that are coming in and out of his films. Each one of those is like a little short story that you could pull into something much larger.
Yeah. And if there was, or not if there was, we had talked about the 8-minute scene in the diner being effectively a short film of its own. I mean, I think you could start and stop the entire story there and just.
If I got that scene submitted to Lakeshorts, I would give it every possible award because to me that scene in itself has a beginning, a middle, and an end. And I don't know where it's going to go. And it would hold my attention for that full 8 minutes or however long. And it's a oneer too. There's not even any like coverage or anything on it, but it would be a fantastic short film just in itself, even just taking that guy that shows up who used to own the photography shop. He and himself is a little short film, and I think that's, I think for me, that's why I love a night of short films is because, you can go out and if you see a feature, you either love it or you don't. You don't get that 2 hours back if you don't. But if you go to a night of short films, you're going to see a film that you really love and you're going to see a film that maybe you don't. But I find there's so much more discussion in a night of shorts. And I think that's part of the reason why we need more short film festivals.
I mean, I agree. There's more short work being produced now than ever just because digital tech has allowed for that to happen, right? You don't have to buy film stock. You don't have to have a crew anymore. If you're talented enough, you can pull it off. And there are plenty of people who aren't talented enough and still trying to pull it off. And I'm seeing emails from them constantly about why isn't their short in a film festival, but that's a different issue. But we're seeing this explosion of talent and people who have something to say. And I'm also in a reasonably privileged position where I get to watch them in 4K and Atmos if they're available that way on a big screen. And I just love the experience of disappearing into someone's creativity for, 6 or 8 minutes and then coming out the other side.
Well, and also I think what it affords both emerging and established filmmakers alike is an opportunity to explore. And so to figure out things like pacing and to like one of the things I love about Mike Leigh's films, and this one in particular, is the pacing, that the pacing is a little bit slower and not particularly in today's day and age when everything is so fast and it's coming at you so quickly, that slow pacing is amazing. But maybe you want to explore it, but not necessarily in a full feature because there's so much at stake in getting a feature done. But shorts allow people, I think, a real opportunity to explore the craft, right? And to try different things. Certainly as an actor, definitely as a writer, to go, okay, how does this story land? Do people find this interesting? How do I want to direct this? Do I want to try it in Mike Leigh style, or do I want to do it completely different and, have it really, much more steady and staged and all of that stuff. And so I think that short films are extremely valuable for that.
Yeah. And I'm glad you're making it possible to see them.
Thanks. Me too. It's a great night. It's a really fun night. Yeah. We always have live entertainment before and after, and we really set it up for discussion, because the same way that you and I are discussing film right now, nobody, like for me, if I watch a good film, I want to talk about it with somebody else.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? I want to talk about that and go, like where you say, did you think that Cynthia was raped? And I go, I did see that. And you're like, I didn't see that. To me, that's a great thing. When you're meeting at intermission, you have an intermission and somebody's like, did you think that this happened? I didn't see that at all. I thought it was this. Like that's what film is, a communal experience, which is why we're waiting until after COVID so that people can really, really talk the way they're meant to.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to that now. The greatest thing about cinema is that 500 people will sit in a room and each one of them will have a slightly different experience from something that is fixed and unchanging.
Exactly.
Love it.
And that we have that we want to sit in a dark room with complete strangers, with 500 other strangers, and that can be an electric ride with people that you don't even know or want to know afterwards. Like it's a very rare thing, it's its own little bit of magic for sure, the cinema. So as much as we can now watch it in our own screens and in our living rooms and whatever, I don't think the theater's going anywhere.
God, I hope not.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah. My thanks to Michelle Nolden, who's currently getting ready for the Grand River Shorts edition of her Lakeshorts International Film Festival, which is happening November 12th at the Dominion Telegraph Centre in Paris, Ontario. You can find program and ticket information at lakeshorts.ca. Thanks also to Jen Paris. She knows what she did. You can find Michelle on Twitter at NoldenMichelle, all one word, and you can find Secrets and Lives in an excellent special edition from the Criterion Collection. It's also streaming on the Criterion Channel, and in the US it's on HBO Max as well. As always, you can find me on Twitter at Norm Wilner and elsewhere on the internet at nowtoronto.com, where I host the Now What podcast every Friday, in addition to writing far too many words about movies and television. And you can find this podcast on Twitter at Semcast, S-E-M-Cast, and pretty much wherever you get your podcasts. Our theme song is by The Last Year. If you like it, or the show in general, please say so. Leave a review wherever you've been enjoying us. Every little bit helps. It truly does. And check out the other shows on the Frequency Podcast Network while you're there. Watch movies, stay safe, wear a mask if you go out, get your shot already. I'll see you next time.